Paragliding in space was a thing in the early vintage days of space? Who thinks of these things? And why would NASA invest $165 million to try landing a Gemini spacecraft on the runway? Well, let's talk more about this bold, daring, and crazy concept on the next Vintage Retrospekt. Hello, I'm Chad, and your host for Vintage Retrospekt, a vintage space series for people who love nostalgia and spaceflight. Splashdowns of the first American space capsules during the Mercury program went fairly well for the space program in the early 1960s. However, splashdowns did not exactly check off all the boxes. What deemed to be missing was the ability for a capsule to perform a landing on a hard surface. This option was investigated as a primary concern in the event of an emergency landing was needed in case the deorbit would have placed the capsule on a surface landing trajectory rather than a planned water landing. Since speed was a priority of NASA to get the first human in space, splashdowns ended up being the initial option. The entire Mercury program used splashdowns, albeit the issue that happened on the second Mercury flight by Grisson. But you can learn more about that mission right up here where I walk you through that heart-racing mission. I do want to address what's going on behind me. We reached a milestone here, and thank you everyone for getting me to 100 subs. You can see behind me some of the construction of the new set, all thanks to you making it possible. Now, this is not going to be the permanent background. There's actually be something a lot cooler than that. But this is just a placeholder for now. So now let's splash back down into the topic. Even though splashdowns became part of America's identity of its space agency, they weren't NASA's favored way to end a mission. When you consider the astronauts were among the most skilled test pilots in the country, it seems weird that they were pulled from the ocean like a forgotten afterthought. Splashdowns came from the initial decision to pursue capsule-style spacecraft, but they turned out to be complicated, expensive, and dangerous. First inspired by the X-15 landings, an engineer at NASA began to drop concepts of a paraglider-like system that can be designed around the space capsule. The name for this system would be called the Rogallo wing, of course named after Francis Rogallo. He saw a problem with the way spacecraft splashed down. He viewed ballistic trajectories through the atmosphere as a lack of control, even though its targeting could still be reliable. Additionally, the parachutes gave no control during landing and seemed too much like a fly-by-wire application, which irritated the astronauts. However, the Mercury Mark II started development, and Francis Rogallo started his plans for a capsule that could land using the manual control of the pilot. Keep in mind that this capsule added another seat for a second crew member, which later was called the Gemini capsule. The controlled descent and landing was to be accomplished by deploying an inflatable paraglider wing, and the NASA's Langley Research Center would be the point of origin for development. North American Aviation obtained a contract with NASA from 1960 through 1963 to make way for a landing system for the Gemini and even the Apollo program, promising the astronauts the autonomy of piloted landing. Consequently, a paragliding system would add more complexity to the new design of the two-man capsule. The considered option was a system that was maneuverable using a modified parachute parasail. A parachute system that would dynamically steer the craft, and finally, an inflatable wing that would be a steerable glider, giving the crew much more control. The Gemini paraglider system underwent extensive testing, including uncrewed and crewed flights. Astronauts Gus Grissom and John Young were initially scheduled to test the Rogallo wing during the Gemini 3 mission. However, the program faced technical challenges such as difficulties in deploying and controlling the wing, which ultimately led to its cancellation. If you'd like to learn more about this bold and daring concept, head over to the link in the description to learn more about Francis and his role at NASA. Also, don't forget to subscribe and like this video so that I can keep adding more immersive things to the channel. I'm your host, Chad, and I will see you out on the launch pad. Oh, and one more thing before I forget. I am also the host at Orbital Edge News, so if you like things modern space and keep updated on the latest highlights of the space program in America and other countries, head right up here to Orbital Edge News and get your awesome epic space news.